Welcome to the Based Boomer podcast on Eschatology Matters, part of the Fight, Laugh, Feast network. The Great LA Fires and the Great Awakening. I've been posting on Twitter and thinking a lot about the Great LA Fires, especially because I was born and raised in LA. God brought me into this cold, cruel world on July 29th, 1960, at Hollywood Presbyterian Hospital. And I grew up in Southern California when it actually was the Golden State. My mom's family moved to LA in 1927, and my dad's family followed in the late 1940s. They were part of a decades-long wave of people immigrating into the state to get their part of the American dream in the most beautiful geography and weather in the world, along with one of the best economies in the world as well. I never in a million years thought I would not live in SoCal, as I called it, but God had different plans. After I left for seminary in August 1986, I swore I would be back in 2 years. God again had different plans. From that point on, I would spend only 3.5 years in my late 30s in what I still considered my home state. We moved to the Chicago area in early 2000, and I was convinced we'd live there for maybe 4 or 5 years max and get back to what I used to call the promised land. That would all change as Democrats slowly took over the state because, for some unfathomable reason, Californians thought the Democrat vision was appealing and voted them into office. Much to my chagrin, Democrats turned the promised land into, as we see, a desolate wasteland. Looking at the devastation this past week, the charred remains are the perfect metaphor for Democrat malevolent incompetence. This phrase came to mind as I tried to put into words the images we're all seeing and the evil, death, destruction, and misery that always comes in the wake of Democrat governance. There are debates on the right about whether Democrats actually plan and intend the destruction they inevitably cause. And maybe for the true blue hardcore Marxists among them intent on perpetual revolution, that might be the case. But I believe most Democrats, leftists all, are just plain stupid. They've been educated and thus indoctrinated into imbecility. This is nothing new, by the way. Well-intentioned leftists, starting with the progressive movement in the 19th century, have been pushing their utopian visions upon American society, and they always end up in disaster. From feminism to the so-called public education of abolition, which arguably gave us the Civil War and over 600,000 American dead men, prohibition, Wilson's rule by experts, Roosevelt's New Deal, Johnson's Great Society and the War on Poverty, the Civil Rights Revolution, the Sexual Revolution, the environmental movement, and we haven't even gotten to woke, which we know contributed to the total incompetence we saw in the Los Angeles government trying to fight the fires. The last week also reminded us of another failed liberal president with good intentions, Jimmy Carter, whose funeral was held in Washington, D.C. I was 16 when Carter was elected in 1976 and remember those 4 years of malaise very well, a word that perfectly captures the Carter years. He introduced gas rationing. I was one who waited in long lines for gas, oversaw skyrocketing inflation, unemployment, and interest rates, what Reagan called the misery index. There was also what seemed like the never-ending hostage crisis in Iran. Here is a portion of his crisis of confidence speech from the Oval Office on July 15th, 1979.
So I want to speak to you first tonight about a subject even more serious than energy or inflation. I want to talk to you right now about a fundamental threat to American democracy. I do not mean our political and civil liberties. They will endure. And I do not refer to the outward strength of America, a nation that is at peace tonight everywhere in the world, with unmatched economic power and military might. The threat is nearly invisible in ordinary ways. It is a crisis of confidence. It is a crisis that strikes at the very heart and soul and spirit of our national will. We can see this crisis in the growing doubt about the meaning of our own lives and in the loss of a unity of purpose for our nation. The erosion of our confidence in the future is threatening to destroy the social and the political fabric of America.
He goes on to try to explain why there is such a crisis of confidence, but typical of the liberal mind, he takes no responsibility for it. It's as if America is a victim of forces beyond its control, and this crisis would have happened no matter who was the president. In fact, I remember distinctly talk in the media about how the presidency is so overwhelming that it's no longer a job that can be handled by just one man. Of course, Americans did blame Jimmy Carter, and Reagan won in a landslide. Then, when Reagan's policies worked after the first tough couple of years, liberals criticized conservatives and Republicans as greedy. Carter's funeral was a reminder of Democrat malevolent incompetence and just how clueless Democrats can be. I saw on Twitter that John Lennon's Imagine was sung at the funeral, and I refused to believe it. I thought Carter was a Christian. Lo and behold, it was true. Sung by Garth Brooks and Trisha Yearwood at that. You just can't make this stuff up. Of course, the Babylon Bee, which I call the paper of record, said it best. Song at funeral comforts everyone by telling them there's no heaven, religion is a lie, and everything is ultimately meaningless. And in a perfect B sentence from the article, experts described the song as most suitable for use at a funeral, however, because the comforting lyrics remind people what really matters. Absolutely nothing. Which brings me to the current lamentable events in the LA area and God's providential ordering of all things for his glory and the good of his people. I'm reading very slowly with Calvin through his commentary on Isaiah and got to the first few verses in chapter 10 a couple days ago. As I read them and his commentary on them, I couldn't help thinking of the poor people in LA devastated by the fires and the Democrat rulers whose policies caused them to be so devastating. Woe to those who make unjust laws, to those who issue oppressive decrees, to deprive the poor of their rights and withhold justice from the oppressed of my people, making widows their prey and robbing the fatherless. What will you do on the day of reckoning, when disaster comes from afar? To whom will you run for help? Where will you leave your riches? Nothing will remain but to cringe among the captives or fall among the slain. God's judgment is a terrible thing, as the writer to the Hebrews says, chapter 10, verse 31. It is a dreadful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. As I was praying about the horrible situation, I realized that in God's judgment, there is mercy. That is the entire message of Isaiah, after all. Even reading up to the beginning of chapter 10, amid the terrible declarations of God's judgment to come, we get, for example, the virgin will be with child and will give birth to a son and will call him Emmanuel. And unto us a child is born. Thinking and praying about this, I realized there is a great awakening potential in this disaster exactly because of God's mercy. Too many Christians seem to delight in declaring God's judgment against America because of her many sins, as if falling into the hands of the living God in judgment is an end in and of itself. It isn't. I argue in my latest book, Going Back to Find the Way Forward, part of God's judgment in allowing the current awakening to happen is the left being unable to control its most radical urges so that normal people, normies as they are called, those not obsessed with politics, have finally had enough. Trump won millions more of these voters in every blue state because these people realized what we've known about liberals for decades. Their policies are disasters waiting to happen. No less than Trump derangement syndrome leader George Will agrees the fires will be waking people up to this truth.
There's going to be an earthquake coming in California, the big real earthquake every once in a while. I mean, we've built a major metropolitan area in a desert on a tectonic fault. we're risking things. You ask for trouble in this naughty world, you get trouble, but there's going to be a political earthquake from this, Leland. The California government is so busy micromanaging life, from algebra classes in schools to the names of the schools, you name it, just protecting endangered species, doing all these things. And people are going to say, can we get the basic things right? Public safety, basic elementary.
The fire hydrants working. Adam Carolla, of all people, the comedian, had some thoughts on the political earthquake. Take a listen.
All these people who were deep blue Democrats are now going to have to pull a permit to rebuild. And they're going to get the 28-year-old bitch from the Coastal Commission telling them to go f off. And then they're going to vote for Trump or whoever's Trumpian next.
Speaking to what Carolla is talking about, Charlie Kirk on his show last week put up a map of how Palisades voted, and it won't surprise us that almost 72% voted for Harris. It's insensitive to say, given the suffering and loss, but Californians get the government and policies they voted for. The cynics on our side will say it doesn't matter. They'll keep voting for destruction. But as I argue in my book, God is providentially working to open people's eyes, that in his judgment he is having mercy by enabling their eyes to be opened. It's important to realize this awakening will be nothing like the first and second Great Awakening, primarily spiritual revivals, or like a Billy Graham crusade revival, which all took place in a Christian culture. This awakening will be much more far-reaching because it's coming on the other side of a dying and decaying secular culture and revealing truth in many areas of life. What's so thrilling about it for me, and makes me so positive, optimistic, and hopeful, is the revelation of truth about anything always ultimately points to he who is the truth, which is Jesus. In case you're a heathen, which is my affectionate term for secular non-Christians who are basically ignorant about Christianity, and you somehow came across this video, I'm not making this up. Jesus says so in the Gospel of John, chapter 14, verse 6. I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Truth is so profound, not just because it's about the nature of things, but because it's a person, Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified for his people's sins, died, buried, rose again from the dead on the third day, and ascended to heaven to sit and rule at the right hand of God. C.S. Lewis said something profound about truth in an essay called Myth Became Fact in God in the Dock. Truth is always about something, but reality is about which truth is. And truth is Jesus, which brings up the title of the second chapter of my book. Truth is the dividing line in Western culture. Those who believe in truth are somewhere along the way to being red-pilled. The left, which completely dominates the Democrat Party, doesn't believe in truth. They are what we call postmodernists, where the narrative, quote, is all, and specifically the narrative that enables their political power. If that narrative is filled with lies, so be it. I recently read 1984 yet again, and it's amazing how in 1948, when Orwell wrote it, how perfectly he captures the leftist groupthink of the 21st century left Democrat Party. There are so many quotes I could pull from the book, but this one captures it well. Since in reality Big Brother is not omnipotent and the party is not infallible, there is need for an unwearying, moment-to-moment flexibility in the treatment of facts. The key word here is black-white. Like so many newspeak words, this word has two mutually contradictory meanings. Applied to an opponent, it means the habit of impudently claiming that black is white, in contradiction of the plain facts. Applied to a party member, it means a loyal willingness to say that black is white when party discipline demands this. But it means also the ability to believe that black is white, and more, to know that black is white, and to forget that one has ever believed the contrary. Because truth is a person, there are metaphysical and spiritual implications to truth wherever it is found. Reality itself, as Lewis says, and reality will always have the last laugh. I often use the metaphor of the Berlin Wall for secular leftist progressivism and the globalist technocratic state it champions. This wall will also come tumbling down because it is all built on lies, and an empire built on lies cannot long endure. It is destined for the same ash heap of history as Ronald Reagan declared of the Soviet Union 10 years before its demise. What I am describing now is a plan and a hope for the long term, the march of freedom and democracy, which will leave Marxism-Leninism on the ash heap of history as it has left other tyrannies which stifle the freedom and muzzle the self-expression of the people. Most of us thought this was wishful thinking. It would be nice, Ronnie, but not in our lifetimes. Then 5 years later, on June 12th, 1987, Reagan doubled down on his conviction of the inherent frailty of the Soviet communist state.
Behind me stands a wall that encircles the free sectors of this city, part of a vast system of barriers that divides the entire continent of Europe. General Secretary Gorbachev, if you seek peace, if you seek prosperity for the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, if you seek liberalization, come here to this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Most everyone, including me, thought, now Ronnie's really lost it. The Berlin Wall and the Soviet Union are not going anywhere. Yet, less than 2 years later, the wall comes down in the USSR shortly thereafter. The remorseless tide of reality mocked the pretensions of communism, even as it now mocks the pretensions of secular progressive religion and their Democrat Party. When the tide goes out, it's clear who is wearing bathing suits and who isn't. Those with bathing suits on, those committed to the truth no matter the cost, are what we call co-belligerents in the existential culture war for Christian Western civilization in which we are now engaged. They are on our side, the side of truth, the side of the kingdom of God. This not only has metaphysical implications in a philosophical sense and also in a spiritual sense, but for politics and governance as well. The Great Awakening continues.
Seated here at my right hand, the Lord to my Lord did command, for of these heathen I will make a kingly footstool for your sake. The Lord